Imagine believing you have built the perfect life: family, marriage, a sense of belonging, only to watch it all start to unravel, not from your own chaos or choices, but from pain that predates you. Now imagine that unraveling isn't the end, but rather the beginning of something so much richer, deeper, and more whole than you ever thought possible. Today's guest didn't just survive that unraveling, she transformed it into a mission to help others heal. I'm Scott Allan, and you're listening to the Enlightened Life podcast, where we explore the mysteries of the soul's journey, healing, and transformation. For anyone who hasn't discovered her work, Mechelle Wingle is the founder of the Wholeness Network and the creator of the Wholeness Library, a treasure trove of wisdom, guided meditations, and practical tools for living more consciously, joyfully, and completely. She's a certified energy worker, intuitive, and teacher who brings together the best of ancient and modern healing practices to help people reconnect with their own inner power. So if you're ready to move beyond just getting by and into a life that feels truly whole, you're going to love this conversation. Mechelle, I'm genuinely delighted to have you here. Your story is really equal parts raw and hopeful, and I think so many listeners are going to see themselves in your journey. Thanks for joining us and for being willing to share not just your expertise, but your heart.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here, and I love sharing my heart. So thank you for saying that.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I want to start with the word itself, wholeness. It's everywhere these days. But is it really a destination? Is it a process, or maybe just a marketing buzzword? What's the real difference between feeling whole and simply being okay?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. When we first started this, it wasn't a popular word. It wasn't one that was used all the time, and it is used quite a bit now. But if you were to Google wholeness, you would find it's a paradox, because it's both. It is being complete and whole, and the process of becoming. So it is actually both, and I think that's beautiful, because I think you can compare it to an apple seed. Is an apple seed whole, and yet it's not an apple? Is an apple whole, yet it's not, on my plate? We're always evolving, and we're always whole at the same time. And I feel like in my bones, that just feels so true. I feel like we're all doing the best that we can, and we're moving forward. We're growing. I feel like the opposite of growth is that stopping. It's that damnation. It's that idea that, it's just the end. It's apathy. It's stuck. And so we are always in this growth cycle. And I feel like for me, on times, even still, it pops up where I'm like, I'm done growing. I don't want to grow anymore. Because growth it has some discomfort, because we're moving into a place that we are not used to. I think if we embrace this idea of wholeness, it takes away a little bit of the sting, because it's like, well, it's not that there's a deficit in me. It's just that I'm growing and being enlightened, adding more light into who I am and what I think and how I feel.
Well, and I love that because, you had said that your family's crisis was really a catalyst for awakening. So in your experience, when we talk about wholeness, do we have to break before we can become whole, or is there another way? And
There's always other ways, but I feel like right now in a lot of people's consciousness, it does take some kind of a tap on the shoulder, or some kind of a pain point that pushes us to the other side. At least for me, I think there are definitely those old souls that come in and have that wisdom. And a lot of times those ones are taken early, to be honest. But, I hope for the day that's not the case, that there's a disruption, but usually there is. And for me, I feel like there had to be. I was just doing fine and going to be on this other course of just being, a mom. It's just hanging out and doing stuff. It's hard for me to even imagine that that's what I thought, but I was just doing that thing. And then difficulties happened. The first thing was my kids went to school, and I thought, well, this is going to be so great. My house will be clean for the first time in how many years? And then a week later, I thought, is that really all that I'm about? Is that all of who I am? And that was like a sinking feeling because I hadn't prepared for this, for anything beyond. I just hadn't. And so, and then as my husband started to just struggle, he just began to be a different person, started to change. And through years of therapy and study, finding out that, he suffers from CPTSD, from childhood emotional neglect. And these, he was taught to hold the feelings in, taught to be a good boy, to always do things right. And at late 30s, early 40s, you just can't hold it anymore. And it starts to fall apart. And the programming is like, I got to pull it together. I got to pull it together until it was difficult. And at one point he was asleep. He would go to work, come home and sleep till the next day for almost a year and a half,
Oh my
just
gosh.
in turmoil, just didn't know how to function. All the tools that had been available to both of us our whole lives just became mute. They weren't working. And so as he was on that journey, I started on a healing journey and decided, I couldn't do his healing, but I could figure out my own because it devastated me. And now I know that, in an interdependent relationship, I have my own life and my own, experience, not dependent on him. I think as a woman, we're often programmed to, exist in tangent with our man, instead of having an independent self, within me. And so when he wasn't okay, I wasn't okay. And I remember reading one morning, waking up and just going, I need to read Codependent No More, which I had kind of heard of, but I'd never read it. Went to the bookstore, got the audio, the manual, and the copy of the book, and read it and said, that's what's going on. And I think a lot of that was trained in me. That was trained. I grew up in a very patriarchal society, and that was what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to show up in, as a secondary person next to my man. And then when he wasn't okay, I didn't even know how to function. So
Yeah.
that
Well, and
began my journey.
it reminds me a little bit too, just what you were saying just a moment ago. It's sort of like when you get on an airplane, they tell you to put your own mask on. If
Mhm.
you can't take care of yourself, how can you take care of anybody else? You need to deal with your own stuff first so that you can help other people and
Right.
realize that you are not just riding in the sidecar. You're not.
Yeah.
You have to take care of yourself. I want to ask you about some of the tools that you've used and explored. And maybe you can explain too, just for people who may not know, because you've explored NLP and IFS and other ancient spiritual tools. What is it?
So NLP is a neuro-linguistic programming, and it's a lot about thinking and the brain and understanding our thoughts and how to shift them using. It's really fascinating because we our five senses is how, and that we have more than that, but that's how we perceive the world. We perceive the world that way. And so we can take a little test and understand what is our dominant sense. So some of us are seeing, some of us are hearing, some of us are feeling. And so when we find that, then we found a portal into our subconscious, and we can use that portal to retrain ourselves, So that's what NLP is. IFS stands for Internal Family Systems. It's really popular right now. There's a whole lot of talk about it. It was began by Richard Swartz, and I'm currently taking another class from him. Just love it, and it's about parts work. If you've ever heard of parts work. And the beauty about parts work that matches perfectly with wholeness is that there's this idea that we, at the core of our being, have what he calls the self or the true self. And this true self has all of our knowledge, all of our healing, all of our compassion. And when we can tune into that self, then we can not only get answers, but we can talk to and help these parts of us. And it makes sense because when we have a decision to make, most of the time, there's a part of us that wants A and there's a part of us that wants B, or there's a part of us that says, I want A, and there's another part that says, yeah, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm good enough or whatever. Both of those are parts. And when we actually acknowledge them and have literally like have a conversation with these parts within us, then and connected to that self, we can understand things, heal things. It's really fascinating. It's a therapy. So most of the
Mhm.
time you would go to a therapist to have IFS, but this is the first time he's allowed and teaching coaches to do it. So I'm so excited
Good
to
for
get
you.
that certification.
What do you think that modern science is missing about the nature of suffering and healing?
I would just say some compassion. I think sometimes in that modern thing, you get into the numbers, you get into the statistics, you get into the who's and what's, but sometimes everyone's different, and that's what I love about IFS. That's what I love about even the Reiki and things like that. I took a heart-centered therapy training, and what that is that teaches me to be in the moment with the person there, walking with them. In IFS, we always let whatever answer comes, we go with it. There's never, it's not, it's been kind of interesting because, like I say, this is the first time that he's allowed coaches to do it. So, in fact, I'm going to be on a call today, and there's going to be 500 people on this call, and they're all coaches. And coaching is used to saying, hey, have you done this? What's going on? How come you haven't done this? What's wrong? Like, hey, promise me you'll do this. And a couple, you have to reteach us and say, that's not what this is about. This is about asking a question, getting an answer, and saying, okay, that makes sense. Because everything we do honestly makes sense from the path that we have walked. And when you really embody that, it's amazing how the world just seems a little kinder and we have a lot more patience with ourselves and with other people. And we get to let go of some of those biases that we just naturally have, which in IFS we call those parts. Those are parts. So we need to understand those parts. Hey, what's going on? And in parts work, parts are always, we call them protectors. They serve a purpose because they're there to protect us in some way, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it's cutting, even if it's an addiction. There's a protective quality to it. And when we go and talk to that part, it's amazing what it will share, what it will explain. And it's just, there's a lot of that makes sense. And so as we build a relationship with them, then they can begin to tell us more and more. And most of the time, some of the ones that are bigger disruptions, we can see that there are these moments in our past where things were hard and we took on these beliefs or this way of being that was necessary for the time. It's this young part of us trying to do this heavy work. And when they get unburdened, it's really amazing to see how quickly change can come when we understand the why.
So you developed the founded the Wholeness Network, right? Which brings together dozens of healing modalities. But I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what that is, but I also want to understand a little bit if someone goes onto the Wholeness Network, how do they discern what they really need? Because I feel like sometimes when you go to therapy or you go to anything like that, even if you go to a coach, you know what you need because you don't know what you don't know.
Mm, yeah, that's true. And if that's the case, I think that there's reason to pause right there. There's just reason to pause and recognize that we don't understand ourselves in a way that we're hoping to. So that's step one, is that I don't have access to information within me, which I think a lot of times the number one reason for that is because we disconnect from our bodies. Because a long time ago, when I was thinking about some things, and it was funny, now we talk about these four bodies: mental body, emotional body, physical body, spiritual body. But a long time ago, I was sitting in meditation and that idea came to me. I had lost a bunch of weight and I was trying to understand how I did it because everybody wanted to say, how did you do it? And it wasn't about my exercise. It wasn't about what I ate. It was this aha moment. I had a strong belief that I had birthed four kids and therefore I could not be a thin person. That was just as simple as that. And when that broke down, everything changed. Like in an instant that broke down, everything changed. And so I was trying to figure out how I could explain to everybody this idea because they didn't have the same belief. To them, they were like, well, that's dumb.
Yeah, I know.
So I was sitting there in meditation and I thought, everybody says I'm an emotional eater. And this thought percolated and it said, what if the weight is in the emotional body? What if we have these bodies? What if it accumulates more than just the physical body? And all we do is attend the physical body. And yet we have these other bodies that need to be, so that set me on a big journey of those 4 bodies. But what was interesting is so I explored more and I realized that the body is the communicator. That was how it was spoken to me. The body is the communicator. And I remember speaking to my colleague about it and saying that, and she says, but I have feelings. And I says, how does it feel in your body? And she went, oh, because we feel things, we understand things. We usually have a physical sensation in our body when we're doing this. But when we have difficulties, then we have difficult sensations in our body. So the easiest way to get rid of those, cut it off. So then we lose access to that information. So then we need to start with maybe some body connection. So if we don't know, we would start with some body connection. So learning to meditate is really important. Now, I don't care what kind of meditation to do. In fact, for the longest time, I would sit there and people would talk about meditating, and I'm like, that's not how I do it. And normally people try to get rid of their thoughts during meditation. I actually will sit there, and of course my mind's running around like a maniac, like everybody. And then pretty soon, all of a sudden, it'll just zero in on a thought or an idea, and I just go with it, and I learned profound things. That was how one of the first tools that I ever had was, somebody said, why don't you try meditating? And in this meditation, ask for a gift is what I was, and I was like, I don't know. So I sit in my closet, close my eyes. My heart is beating out of my chest because I'm in such turmoil that if this doesn't work, it's one of those things where I don't know what I'll do. So I kind of just sat there for a minute, and all of a sudden the scene changed, and I was in this ravine, and there was I always picture it like in the movie the Last Crusade with Indiana Jones, and at the end he goes on that long trail, and he can't see anything till he throws some sand on it and realizes it's this narrow path that crosses this long ravine. It was very much like that. And it was a ways to cross. It took some time. I knew that was going to be scary to cross that. And so the thought came to my mind, well, I'll just hurry and fall off and get it over with. Like, that's the feeling I had. And I felt this, feeling of, don't do that. Keep going. And so in that meditation, kind of probably just stared at it for a while and just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I would go back to it several times, and over years I would check in, and I would be a little bit further on that path, a little bit further on that path. Then I remember feeling like I've gotten through it. Now I'm in a desert, and then I would be like, okay, and I'd have this feeling, there's an oasis up ahead. Just keep moving. And till I felt like that completed at some point, but that's what kept me going. That was that first time I ever meditated. The first tool I ever had was so profound. It's what brought me here today, because it just keep going. Don't give up. Don't stop. You could, like, that was the feeling. You could, but we really wish you wouldn't.
We wish you wouldn't. Yeah. And changing the mindset, I think, is really where, it's sort of funny. I'm chuckling a little bit in my head when you had said something about, well, I've had 4 babies, so therefore I have extra weight. And, the reality is, I just turned 59. I'm not as thin as, I'm not obese, but I'm not like I was when I was 19, nor do I want to be that thin again.
Right.
But the funny thing is I just had this conversation with someone about how, we're not like we used to be. The bodies aren't the same as they used to be. And I jokingly said to this friend of mine, well, my son is going to be 12. He just turned 12, actually. He just turned 12. And I said, well, I don't understand. He's 12 years old and I still haven't lost my baby weight. I mean, it's like,
Right.
it's that excuse, but, there are a bunch of excuses, and, it's getting out of your head a little bit to get in and change the direction and the path, and know that you can really take that journey.
Hmm.
Some spiritual teachers will say too, you are not broken. But what about those who really feel it, or even
Mm.
benefit from seeing themselves in that way? Is there value, do you think, in I want to say temporary brokenness, because we don't ever want to be there forever, but do you think there's some value in that, or no?
Well, if I was working with a client one-on-one and they said, I feel like it's important to say I'm broken and I need to be fixed, then I would sit with them and say, okay, I will be broken with you. Let's be broken together. What does that feel like? What does feeling broken make you want to do? Let's really explore that feeling. What sensations in our body does that bring up? And then most of the time I'm just like, yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. What would happen, or what if we could be fixed? What would that feel like? We can practice that as well. That's the exciting thing about humans, is that we can practice states of being, and we have access to all of those emotions. And that's the other thing too. Again, I would recognize, okay, there's a part of us that feels broken. Does that feel correct? Versus we're all broken. And that helps a little bit to separate ourselves from this piece. And then we can talk to that feeling, that part that feels broken. But we have access to all these emotions, and we think that we're trying to get to a point where we have no, quote, negative emotions. But that's kind of like, I want to see only the colors that are my favorite and nothing else. Like, we are human beings here having an experience of humanity, like being human. And so we will have all those emotions. The problem is that in our society, we have decided there are good and there are bad, or if there are bad, we have done something, or if there are bad, we've got to hurry and make that go away. I still feel that on some days. I still feel that I have to sit with it and say, okay, what does this feel like? I'd have to get really clear on what it feels like. And especially, like I say, in the body, communicate, say, there it is in the body. Okay, is there anything you want me to do? Or is there anything you want me to say? And sometimes it's just, I just need to feel this for a minute.
Yeah.
And the discomfort is great. Sometimes I don't like it, but by nature, emotions, they shift and they move. That's one of their major qualities, is that they move and change. So if I can hold it for a little bit, and maybe I have to reach out and get help. Sometimes I need someone to sit with me in that. But if I can hold through it, then it processes out, it expresses out. And then sometimes I've got to go to bed and wake up the next day. It's like that. But I hold that space for that day, that it's like, this is in some way, this is a holy day. This one's difficult. This
Well,
one's harder.
it's funny, and I was just going to say to you, the paradox of healing is that the things that hurt us the most are sometimes the very things that wake us up
Hmm.
a little bit further.
Yep. It's true. It's true. And I would say, just because it's difficult and we don't like it, let's, you know, you can acknowledge that this hurts. I don't like this. I wish it was a little bit different, and instead of saying, but it's okay, like really go into those emotions, and especially know that that's just one part, because there is that other part that says, yeah, but there's growth here. So we listen to both parts fully. When was the first time I felt this way? Once you get really, really clear about the feelings inside the body and what it feels like, we can say, when was the first time I felt this? And you'll be surprised at what comes forward. Things that you don't expect. Sometimes it's just a small, simple thing that's showed up in our childhood that has created this,
Yeah.
never doing that again, right? Which is great. It's like, that's nice.
Yeah.
But we need to, but that younger person's trying to carry that load and saying, we got to never do this again. So I've got to do this, to make sure that doesn't happen again. And it's a young person. They don't know how to do that. So a lot of times you can tell them how, you can say, how old do you think I am? And a lot of times those parts laugh. I had the client the other day, and she's like, I said, just how old do they think you are? And she said, oh, young. And I said, well, let them know how old you are. She was in her 60s. And she said, they're just laughing. Like, are you kidding me? And so we asked, do you think a 63-year-old could handle this? And they were like, yeah, actually. Okay, that makes sense. I don't have to do it. We've got this self that's able to do all the things.
Yeah. Are there limits to mindfulness?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think, we're here to have a human experience. And so some days we're going to, some days we're going to watch that show. Sometimes we're going to listen to that music. Sometimes we're going to eat that food. And, maybe if we are actually choosing it, maybe that's mindfulness, I don't know. But yeah, I think that sometimes, I think we have to, I think that people can get, like, there's a line where we move into the opposite end of the spectrum, and that's not necessarily healthy either.
Well, true. And that's what I was going to say too. Is there the danger of slipping into perfectionism?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I've known when I've gone to conferences, you're looking at, maybe this is an energy healing conference, and I see people sitting there and they're sniffing their essential oils every 3 minutes, I'm thinking, okay, we're still not addressing the underlying problems. We've moved it onto a different tool, but there's some anxiety there. There's some hurt there, and we need to pause there for a minute.
Right, right. Yeah, it's not a magic potion. I mean, it's sort of all encompassing. You also teach intuitive and psychic development?
A little bit. Yeah, well, I'm learning it myself. I have always been intuitive.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was intuitive till my late 40s. I didn't know that little kids didn't have conversations with their dead grandma when they were little and, you know, talk about how what their mom has just done and said, like, can you do something for her? She's, I'm tattling to my grandma who's dead when I'm 5 years old. Like this happened quite a bit. I did not know that other people didn't do that. I just thought, I don't know. So and again, my upbringing, I was so focused on being a good mom and being a good wife and being a good homemaker. I didn't I didn't take time to say, wow, I have some of these gifts. So it's been a journey for me to accept that. It took a long time to accept that. It took a long time to speak it out loud. Um, and so it's one of those things where it comes, like there's just inspiration sometimes that comes, things that were our family. After my dad passed away, there was all of his book with all of the will and the trust was missing. They had tried to find it even before my dad had passed. He's like, I have all this information and I don't know where it's at. And the attorney had stopped working or something. I can't remember. So it was just kind of like, we've got to find this paperwork. And I was, a lot of times I get woken up in the middle of the night and I drew a picture of where something lost. I wasn't sure what it was. And then we were going to my dad's house to kind of help clean it out. And people were talking about this lost thing. And my brother-in-law, it was the one who had kind of came to me. And when they were talking about it, I said, okay, let me think of where this is. It was like a piece of furniture that was low that had a scallop at the bottom. And there was kind of maybe books behind, and it was behind. So I walked where it was, picked it up, said, here it is. And my family was like, what? I'm the youngest. I'm the youngest of 7 kids.
Wow.
And so my 6 siblings are just kind of like, who are you? I was a little extra at the end. I was a surprise little at the end. So my closest siblings, 6.5 years older than me. So I was always that cute little sister. And so they're like, what happened? Because I changed. I wasn't always this person because I didn't know. So that was the first time they were like, is this what you're kind of talking about? And I think to this day, they're still kind of like, what happened there, or just like pretend like that didn't happen. It was a little freaky, but
It is.
and it freaked me out too. I was shaking. I was like, wow.
Yeah, but you could have brushed it off as a coincidence, and I think that's what a lot of people do, right? So
True.
they have the intuition, they say, "Oh, what a coincidence! I was just thinking of that," or whatever, and it's not always the case. There is something else that's going on
Yes.
here a
Yeah,
lot.
we all have that access. We all do. It's about tuning in. And again, back to the body, it's like I can feel in my belly whether it's my own brain talking or whether it's something else. And that's the muscle to practice, honestly.
Yeah. Speaking of the body, is there a wisdom that you found in the physical that you couldn't reach through the mind or spirit alone?
My physical body,
Yeah,
or
like physically. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So the heart is like, to me, that's like a portal. That's like a portal to heaven. Like if you just take a couple breaths, you can just take a couple breaths right now and just imagine dropping that all that's, first of all, you got to notice all the stuff that's going on in your brain. Like it's actually buzzing, and you can bring that sensation down into the heart and you just feel kind of this light. And then you can ask your heart questions. I have a colleague, she calls it the Google. She's like, it's better than Google. You can ask a question like, what is best for me? What should I do right now? And really understanding, again, back to those senses, am I going to hear it? Am I going to see it? Maybe a visual will show up. Maybe I'll hear like a word. Maybe I will feel something in my body. And then we have to ask again. So tell me more, tell me more. We got to stick with it for a little bit, maybe to practice, but the wisdom can come that heart, whether it's our heart physically, but it's also that heart chakra, which is the bridge between all the spiritual and the physical chakras. And so there's a power there. We can also, on the Wholeness Network, one of our guides her name's Christine Lang, and she just has a book out that says, you know, ask your spirit. And I was looking to see if I had it around, but and she talks about, your spirit has answers for you. You can learn to talk to your own spirit and say, what do I need? And when you build that muscle, it's there, which again, you would probably call that an IFS, that big S self. It's the same concept, different vocabulary. Vocabulary gets us tripped up a lot when you're first starting out. That vocabulary can get you tripped up because there's so many words. Like you'll say, like, I remember feeling the idea of duality, and I was like, no, we don't want dualistic. Well, the duality, it's like there. If you actually look it up, it's another paradox. It's both and so we get confused with don't get stuck on the vocabulary. Everybody's got a different word, and we gotta feel it. That's why we gotta feel it in our bodies more than our brains.
I think you're absolutely right. And don't get discouraged if you're not getting it the first or second time. It really, you will start to understand not just the way it feels, but how spirit communicates with you. It's because we're all different, right? So
Mhm.
how you receive what you receive and how I receive might be entirely different. And you say, am I feeling it, thinking it, knowing it? But sometimes it's a little bit of each, and it's sort of
Yeah.
like putting a jigsaw puzzle together to make it fit and understand what the message is that's coming. So don't give up on that. Will, it is a little nuanced.
Yeah,
I
it
don't
is.
use any language at all. I mean, I don't sit there and go, well, is it duality? Or, I don't use
Right.
any of that,
Yep.
Don't get caught up in it.
Yeah, I love one of the tools. I love the Enneagram. Sometimes that's helpful because people understand a little bit more about themselves. And in the Enneagram, it's divided into a trine, and there's people that are in the body trine, there's people that are in the feelings trine, and there's people that are in the mind trine. And that's helpful sometimes because it's really difficult for people that are very mind-based to feel like they can come into this world because everybody's like, don't pay attention to your mind, don't pay attention. But that's doesn't work. They are mind-based. It's going to process a little differently for them. And they've got to practice and figure out how that works, but they might probably be very visual, things like that. So you can't, the mind is not bad. We just need to bring in the other thing. So it's like, okay, here's this thought. Okay, how do I feel about that thought? What does that thought feel like in my body? And then the spiritual body is all about connection and meaning. How is that meaningful for me, or what meaning does that have for me? Because you'll get like a picture, and it's not going to feel the same for everybody. No, it's not going to feel the same for everybody. So how does that mean for me? What is that? What is that trying to say to me? And you can think through it and then check it with those other bodies.
Yeah, and I find too, and I don't know if you can understand this either, but it's almost like sometimes the less you think, the better. Like
True.
it's just coming, and what's the first thing that kind of like, how did it first make you feel? Because
Hmm.
if you start thinking, then your brain's in the way, and things kind of can go awry,
Yeah.
because what I see is not necessarily what you see or feel
Hmm.
or think. And so you just have to kind of, sometimes you just can't get your head in it too much. I know and we just talked about people who are head based, and I
Yeah.
totally get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have always been that way a little bit. It took me so long to kind of open up because I say kind of a healthy skeptic. I was a good
Yeah.
skeptic. I believed, but I needed it to be proven to me.
Hmm.
Just a quick question on someone, someone's listening to this and they are living with a narcissist or they're in some kind of a toxic dynamic. What do you think is the first philosophical shift that they might need to make, not just for their own survival, but for reclaiming their wholeness?
Mm. Number one is sometimes it is them and not us. We're always trying to do our own work, which is good, but sometimes that gets us tripped up because it's like, well, maybe if I do this, to understand the dynamic of the relationship. So many people, they don't like, to use that word, the narcissist, they're like, well, I don't want to call him that. I know. And it's like, well, I don't want to call them anything. It's not about calling it. It's about understanding the dynamic. And when we understand the dynamic of a relationship, it's very predictable. And so when we know that dynamic, then we can start to work on ourselves. We have to understand the dynamic of what we're working with. Because even my husband in his therapy one day, he says, I think I might be a little narcissistic, or narcissistic tendencies. And the therapist just kind of nodded and it wasn't because he's this diagnosed narcissist. That's one thing that gets struggles. There is a diagnosis, but because he was so wounded. He was just focused on his own self. He couldn't put himself in somebody else's perspective because he was in such pain inside himself. So understand, so even still, I'm still married to him. I still love him, but we had to understand that dynamic for a time. That was like, he is so self-focused that I can't expect him to assume my position. He can't for a minute. So more therapy came and that changed. But for that minute, it was him that kind of said, I think I'm that way. And that started to shift things.
Mhm.
But yeah, sometimes it's them. Sometimes it's not us. And most of the time when you're with a narcissist, you're the most empathic person. So you will try to fix yourself to support the other person.
It's so funny you say that because my whole life, I am an empath, and the whole life I was, I don't want to say attracted in a romantic way, but just sort of like magnetically attracted, it felt, to people who needed to be fixed by me.
Yeah.
So I thought,
Yeah.
I hate to fix these people. And I didn't even realize I was doing it until I looked back years later, and I don't want to, I don't need to do that. That's not,
Right.
yeah. Before we wrap up, is there a story or a thought you'd love to leave with our listeners?
Well, I just wanted to, a thought popped in when we were talking about, receiving that stuff in the flow and things like that. So one time I dared to put out like a free webinar where I was going to practice my intuitiveness. I was like, and it was really scary. And a lady, got on and I immediately started to see some visuals. And what happened was, as I began to saw what I first saw is I saw a little girl reaching up and holding the hand of her mom, and my brain wanted to think about what that meant. It wanted to go into what this means versus just saying it. And so and then it moved on to the next thing, and I saw this little doll. And so I said, okay, I see there's like a doll. And she was like, oh my gosh, my mom, she collected dolls, she collected dolls. And we went off on this tangent, but and when she described the dolls, it looked different than the doll I had seen. And so I got off the call and we went on a bike ride, and I just thought, okay, I was like half praying, half asking my guides, half talking to myself, saying, okay, listen, if I'm going to do this, I need to know if like, what it was that right? It's the first time I had done it with somebody just out there with somebody I didn't know. And so I said, I need to know if this is my path. Will you show me a blue butterfly? Blue butterfly, that's my message. Let's go. So we went on this bike ride. I saw the color blue that I was looking for 1,000 places, but never a butterfly. And my heart would just be beating. I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do? Is that supposed to, whatever. We went on a different path that we usually go. And as we came around the court, as we're almost home, I thought, is that the lesson? Is to to not interpret it, kind of this idea of like, are you trying to show me something? And that second I turned, there's a blue butterfly that turns right there. So I learned a lesson not to interpret, but to just say what I saw. Come to find out, I talked to the woman later. Her sister was passed, and her mom and her sister had a missing arm, which I didn't know. So that was the whole reaching. She was able to reach up and hold hands with her mom now that she wouldn't have been able to do in physical form. And so there was deep messages there that I didn't get because I was trying to find the meaning in myself. I was trying to logic it and figure it out. So that was a really good lesson to learn, to just
Great lesson.
let it be, just to let the answers come instead of trying to interpret them. But it's so easy to do.
It is. It's difficult not to do it, actually.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's what I mean. You're right.
It's true. Thank you so much, Mechelle. I appreciate you being here. And if you all want to dive a little deeper into Michelle's world, check out the Wholeness Network. And is it thewholenessnetwork.com?
Yes, thewholenessnetwork.com. Yep.
And here's a special gift. Use code Mechelle, M-E, as you can see at the screen, MECHELLE, for 2 months free access to the Wholeness Library, packed with wisdom, meditations, and practical tools to help you feel more whole every day. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who might need a little hope or a fresh start. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and join us next week for more stories of transformation on the Enlightened Life podcast. Till then, healing is possible, purpose is real, and wholeness is available to every one of us, even if it looks a little messy along the way. We'll see you next time.